Ah, that music brings me back. One moment, I might kick the bucket for just a second here. It's okay. Okay. Amazing. It's all working. I wonder what this diamond means. The upside down diamond. I guess it's just a sigil of um, like the Empire. But I didn't realize necessarily. I feel like in Skyrim it's not a diamond, but I might be wrong. Might need to restart it here. Sometimes it doesn't like it if I alt tab out. Yeah, it does not like it. Amazing, it crashed. Saved. Occasionally, like if I alt tab out, it doesn't like it, and since it's a really old game, sometimes it'll not want to close, and I'll just have to restart my computer because it's just stuck. But it crashed. It saved itself. It knew it needed to happen. Here we go. Okay. Currently at Molegmar. Check my audio again. Make sure it's working. Testing, 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 testing. Awesome. Okay, so I left off. I had made the journey from Suran to Molegmar. Oh yeah, and there are books I wanted to read. This one. My voice got tired, so I didn't read it. Okay, Ice and Chitin. Chitin, like chitin armor, like a beetle skin, I'm assuming. By Pletius Spatek. The tale dates to the year 855 of the Second Era, after General Talos had taken the name Tiber Septim and begun his conquest of Tamriel. Okay, so Second Era. One of his commanding officers, Betia of Ilios. Iliolos. Iliolos, yes. Okay. One of his commanding officers, Betia of Iliolos, had been surprised in an ambush while returning from a meeting with the Emperor. She and her personal guard of 5 soldiers barely escaped and were separated from their army. They fled across the desolate, sleet-painted rocky cliffs by foot. The attack had been so sudden, they had not even the time to don armor or get to their horses. "If we can get to the Gorvig Ridge," hollered Lieutenant Ascutus, probably, gesturing towards a peak off in the mist, his voice barely discernible over the wind. "We can meet the legion you stationed in Pornak." Pornak? Yeah, I'm not sure to pronounce things, so I'm improvising. Betia looked across the craggy landscape through the wind-swept, hoary trees. I think hoary means gray, like old or something, and shook her head. "Not that way. We'll be struck down before we make it halfway through the mountain. You can see their horses' breath through the trees." She directed her guard towards a ruined old keep on the frozen isthmus of Neron, across the bay from Gorvig Ridge. I wonder where we are. So this is returning from. I mean, it might just be in Cyrodiil, I guess. But Skyrim, probably. I don't recognize these locations from playing Skyrim, but maybe it's a different part of Skyrim. So she directed her guard towards a ruined old keep on the frozen isthmus. Isthmus is like a. Let me look it up quick. I learned this in geography, but it's been a moment. It's like a part of land that sticks out, I think. The Isthmus of Panama. I know it. Okay, it's like the small piece of connecting land that with sea on both sides, right? Yeah, okay. It's the Isthmus of Neron, across the bay from Gorvig Ridge. Jutting out on a promontory of rock, it was like many other abandoned castles in northern Skyrim. Remnants of Riemann Cyrodiil's protective shield. Yeah, so Riemann must have been. That was the Emperor Riemann III of the First Era, I think. Maybe Riemann was like the imperial, or the. I don't even know if it was an empire at that point, but that was like the line of kings in the First Era, I think. That's my understanding. Yeah, so it was in the same architectural style, I suppose. So Riemann had a protective shield against the continent of Akavir. Yeah, the snake people probably were attacking, I think, is my understanding. As they reached their destination and made a fire, they could hear the army of the war chiefs of Danstar behind them, making camp on the land southwest, blocking the only escape but the sea. The soldiers assessed the stock of the keep, while Betia looked out to the fog-veiled water through the casements of the ruin. Just quickly, I'm not quite sure what a casement is. I'm going to look it up quick here. Casement is. It's like a window set in a hinge that opens like a door. It's just like a. Kind of like that stereotypical image of somebody opening the window. It's like a breath of fresh air, and they push the windows open. Hmm. So they're stuck in this castle, and the war chiefs of Dawnstar, I'm not sure exactly who they are, but if they're in Skyrim, I wonder if Dawnstar is like an early name for Dawnstar, or it's a typo. No, it's not, because the W is missing too. Could be. Um, could be just like the precursor to Dawnstar, maybe. So the sea is their only escape. Yikes. So Betia threw a stone in the water, watching it skip across the ice, trailing puffs of mist before it disappeared with a splash into a crack in the surface. No food, no food or weaponry to be found, Commander, Lieutenant Ascutus reported. There's a pile of armor in storage, but it's definitely taken on the elements over the years. I don't know if it's salvageable at all. We won't last long here, Betia replied. The Nords know that we'll be vulnerable when night falls, and this old rock won't hold them off. If there's anything in the keep that we can use, find it. We have to make it across the ice floe to the ridge. After a few minutes of searching and matching pieces, the guards presented two very grimy, scuffed, and cracked suits of chitin armor. I think that's how you pronounce it. I might be wrong. Even the least proud of the adventurers and pirates who had looted the castle over the years had thought the shells of chitin beneath their notice. The soldiers did not dare to clean them. The dust looked to be the only adhesive holding them together. They won't offer us much protection. Just slow us down, grimaced Ascutus. Wait, they won't offer us much protection. Just slow us down, grimaced Ascutus. If we run across the ice as soon as it gets dark. Anyone who can plan and execute an ambush like the war chiefs of Dawnstraw will be expecting that. We need to move quickly now, before they're any closer. Betia drew a map of the bay in the dust, and then a semicircular path across the water. An arc stretching from the castle to the Gorvich Ridge. What if it's Gorvich? Gorvich Ridge, maybe. Hmm. Yeah, right. I'm just trying to figure out what happened. I'm slightly confused. Okay. And a semicircular path across the water, arcs from the castle. Yeah, so the men should go the long way across the bay, like so. The ice is thick there, a ways from the shoreline, and there are lots of rocks for cover. Because this Gorvish Ridge, is that where their base is? Right, I get it. So there's a frozen bay between this castle and the isthmus and the ridge. And that's what they're trying to get to. I get it. Okay. So they're going the long way around. I see. You're not staying behind to hold the castle. Of course not. BTS shook her head and drew a straight line from the castle to the closest shore across the bay. I'll take one of the chitin suits and try to cross the water here. If you don't see or hear me when you made it to land, don't wait. Just get to Pornac. Lieutenant Ascutus tried to dissuade his commander, but he knew that she would never order one of her men to perform the suicidal act of diversion, that all would die before they reached Gorvish Ridge if the war chief's army was not distracted. He could only find one way to honor his duty and protect his commanding officer. It was not easy convincing Commander Bedia that he should accompany her, but at last she relented. The sun hung low, but still cast a diffused glow, illuminating the snow with a ghostly light, when the 5 men and 1 woman slipped through the boulders beneath the castle to the water's frozen edge. Betia and Ascutus moved carefully Precisely, painfully aware of each dull crunch of chitin against stone. At their commander's signal, the four unarmored men dashed towards the north across the ice. When her men had reached the first fragment of cover, a spiral of stone jutting a few yards from the base of the promontory. Okay. Betia turned to listen for the sound of the army above. Nothing but silence. They were still unseen. Ascutus nodded, his eyes through the helmet showing no fear. The commander and her lieutenant stepped onto the ice and began to run. When Betia had surveyed the bay from the castle ramparts, the crossing closest to shore had seemed like a vast, featureless plain of white. Yeah, okay. Now that she was down in the ice, it was even more flat and stark. The sheet of mist rose only up their ankles, but it billowed up at their approach like the hand of nature itself was pointing out their presence to the enemies. Yeah, that's a good picture. They were utterly exposed. It came almost as a relief when Betia heard one of the war chief's scouts whistle a signal to his masters. They didn't have to turn around to see if the army was coming. The sound of galloping hoofs and the crash of trees giving way was very clear over the whistling wind, I bet. Betia wished she could risk a glance to the north to see if her men were hidden from view, but she didn't dare. She could hear Ascutus running to her right, keeping pace, breathing hard. He was used to wearing heavy armor, but the chitin joints were so brittle and tight from years of disuse, it was all he could do to bend them. The rocky shore to the ridge still looked at eternity, and I gotta email Bethesda about that one. It looked at eternity away when Betia felt and heard the first volley of arrows. Most struck the ice at their feet with sharp, cracking sounds, but a few nearly found home, ricocheting off their backs. She silently offered a prayer of thanks to whatever anonymous shellsmith, now long dead, had crafted the armor. They continued to run. Or yeah, it's like shell. Yeah, right. Crab shell, maybe even. Could be mud crab shell. I'm not sure exactly. They continued to run as the first rain of arrows was quickly followed by a second and a third. Thanks, Stendar, Ascutus gasped. If there was only leather in the keep, we'd be pierced through and through. Now, if only it weren't so rigid. Betia felt her own armor joints begin to set, her knees and hips finding more and more resistance with every step. There could be no denying it. They were drawing closer and closer to the shore, but they were running much more slowly. She heard the first dreadful galloping crunch of the army charging across the floe towards them. The riders were cautious on the slippery ice, not driving their horses at full speed, but Betia knew they would be upon the two of them soon. The old chitin armor could withstand the bite of few arrows, but not a lance driven with the force of a galloping horse. Yeah, yikes. The only great unknown was time. The thunder of beating hoofs was deafening behind them when Ascutus and Betia reached the edge of the shore. The giant, jagged stones that strung around the beach blockaded the approach. Beneath their feet, the ice sighed and cracked. They could not stand still, run forward, nor run back. Straining against the tired metal in the armor joints, they took 2 bounds forward and flew at the boulders. The first landing on the ice sounded an explosive crack when they rose for the final jump. It was on a wave of water so cold it felt like fire through the thin armor. Ascutus's right hand found purchase in a deep fissure. Betia gripped with both hands, but her boulder was slick with frost. Faces pressed to the stone, they could not turn to face the army behind them. But they heard the ice splintering and the soldiers cry out in terror for just an instant. Then there was no sound but the whining of the wind and the purring lap of the water. Ooh, that's a good picture. A moment later, there were footsteps on the cliff above. The 4 guardsmen had crossed the bay. They made it. I kind of thought they weren't going to make it. Nice. There were 2 to pull Beatty up from the face of the boulder and another 2 for Ascidas. They strained and swore at the weight, but finally they had their commander and her lieutenants safely on the edge of Gorvish Ridge. By Mara, that's a heavy for light armor. Yes, yes, smiled Beatia wearily, looking back over the empty, broken ice floe, the cracks radiating from the parallel paths she and Ascidas had run. But sometimes that's good. Huh, so I bet she'd planned that. Planned for the ice to crack under the heavy armor. Cool. That's worth a lot of money, actually. Could sell that. One more book to read. Vernaccius and Bourlor. Vernaccius? Maybe 2 C's is ch. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, Vernaccius. I like Vernaccius. By Tavi Dromio. Hallgerd walked into the king's ham. Yeah, another. Oh man, Elder Scrolls bars have silly names. Like what? The king's ham? There was another one I saw last time. I don't remember what it was, but that was really funny. So Hallgerd walked into the king's ham that Lordas evening, his face clouded with sadness. While he ordered a mug of grief, his mates, Garaz and Shiomara, joined him with moderately sincere concern. What's wrong with you, Hallgerd? Asked Shiomara. You're later than usual, and there's a certain air of tragedy you've dragged in with you. Have you lost money or a nearest and dearest? I haven't lost any money, Hallgerd grimaced. But I've just received word from my nephew that my cousin Aliak has died. Perfectly naturally so. It's just old age. Aliak was 10 years younger than me. His nephew died of old age, and he's not. I guess he must be old. Oh, that's terrible. But it goes to show that it's important to savor all of life's possibilities, because you never know when your time is coming, said Garaz, who had been sitting at the same stool at the Smoky Corner Club for the last several hours. Nice. He was not one cursed with self-awareness. Life's short, all right, agreed Shiomara, but if you'll pardon a sentimental thought, few of us are aware of the influence we'll have after our deaths. Perhaps there's comfort there. True. Yeah, we don't really know when people's memories of us will fade away, or what will our influence be after we die. I think that's comforting. Yeah, I agree. For example, have I told you the story about Vernaccius and Bourlor? Vernaccius and Bourlor. I don't believe so, said Hallgerd. Vernaccius was a Daedra, said Shiomara, throwing a few dribbles on Flynn on the hearth to cast the proper mood. Ooh. And though our tale took place many, many years ago, it would be fair to say that Vernaccius still is one. Still is one. For what, after all, is time? For what, after all, is time to the immortal Daedra? Actually, Garaz interrupted, I understand that the notion of immortality. I am trying to offer our friend an inspirational tale in his hour of need, Shiomara growled. I don't have all bloody night to tell it if you don't mind. You wouldn't have heard of Vernaccius, said Shiomara, abandoning the theme of immortality for the time being. For even at the height of his power and fame, he was considered feeble by the admittedly high standards of the day. Of course, this lack of respect infuriated him, and his reaction was typical of Lesser Daedra. He went on a murderous rampage. Soon word spread through all the villages in the Colovian west of the unholy terror. Whole families had been butchered, castles destroyed, orchards and fields torched and cursed so nothing would ever grow there again. Dang. For a lesser Daedra, that seems pretty potent. To make things even worse for the villagers, Vernachus began getting visitations from an old rival of his from Oblivion. She was a Daedra seducer named Horavatha, and she delighted in taunting him to see how angry she could make him become. You flooded a village, and that's supposed to be impressive, she would sneer. Try collapsing a continent, and maybe you'll get a little attention. Vernachus could become pretty angry. He didn't come very close to collapsing the continent of Tamriel, but it wasn't for lack of trying. I guess this was probably a mythic age story when these, godlike beings were, I think, a lot stronger. I think my understanding is they lost a lot of their true power as time has gone on, and the mortals have, I don't know. Now it's kind of the mortal world more. A hero was needed to face them. I might be wrong about that, I'm not sure. A hero was needed to face the mad Daedra, and unfortunately, one was available. His name was Bourlor, and it was said that he had been blessed by the goddess Kynareth, goddess of the winds and storm, I think. That was the only explanation for his inhuman accuracy with his bow and arrow, for he never missed a target. As a child, he had driven his marksmanship tutors wild with frustration. They would tell him how to plant his feet, how to knock a bolt, the proper grip for the cord, the best method of release. He ignored all the rules, and somehow, every time, the arrow would catch a breath of wind and sail directly to its target. It didn't matter if the quarry was moving or still, at very close range or miles away. Whatever he wanted to strike with his arrow would be struck. Bourlor answered the call when one of the village mayors begged him for help. Unfortunately, he was not as great as horseman as he was an archer. As he rode through the forest towards the mayor's town, a place called Evensakan, Vernachus was already murdering everyone there. Horavatha watched and stifled back a yawn. Murdering a small town mayor isn't going to put you in famous company, you know. What you need is a great champion to defeat. Someone like Ysgramor or Penel Whitestrake or... She stared at the figure emerging from the forest. Oh, this is the Daedra. Wrong voice. That's okay. That fellow. Who's he? Growled Vernachus between bites of the mare's quivering body. The greatest archer in Tamriel. He's never missed. Bourlor had his bow strung and was pointing at the Daedra. For a moment, Vernachus felt like laughing. The fellow was not even aiming straight. But he had a well-honed sense of self-preservation. There was something about the man's look of confidence that convinced the Daedra that Horavatha wasn't lying. As the bolt left the bow, Vernachus vanished in a sheet of flame. The arrow impaled the tree. Bourlor stood and stared. He had missed a target. In Oblivion, Vernachus raged. Fleeing before a mortal man like that, not even the basest scamp would have been so craven. He had exposed himself for the weak, cowardly creature he was. As he considered what steps to take to salvage the situation, he found himself face to knee with the most fearsome of the Daedra princes, Molag Bal. I wonder... I've read about him, but I forget... Or that, maybe she, I don't know. I've read about this person, I forget about who they are. But... I never thought anything much of you, Vernachus, the giant boomed. But you have proven more. But you have more than proven your worth. You've shown the creatures of Mundus, the mortal plane, that the Daedra are more powerful than the blessings of the gods. True. Yeah, he did. escape the unmissable um, arrow. The other denizens of Oblivion quickly agreed, as they always did, with the view of Moneyball. Is he really the most fearsome? I feel like Mehrin's Dagon is up there. But yeah, Moneyball is scary. That's true. The Daedra are, after all, always very sensitive about their various defeats at the hands of mortal champions. Vernachus was proclaimed the elusive beast, the unpursuable one, he who cannot be touched, the bane of Kynareth. Shrines devoted to him began to be built in remote corners of Morrowind and Skyrim. Bourlor, meanwhile, now found flawed, was never again called to rescue a village. He was so heartbroken over his failure to strike his target that he became a hermit and never restrung his bow again. Some months later, he died, unmourned and unremembered. Is this really the tale you thought would cheer me? Asked Halgard incredulously. I've heard the King of Worms told more inspirational stories. That's interesting. King of Worms. Not sure who that is. Wait, smiled Chiamara. I'm not finished yet. For a year's time, Vernachus was content to watch his legend grow and his fledgling warship spread from his home in Oblivion. He was, in addition to being cowardly and inclined towards murderous rages, also a very lazy creature. His worshippers told tales of their master avoiding the bolts of 1,000 archers, of moving through oceans without getting wet, and other feats of avoidance that he would rather not have to demonstrate in person. Yeah, he's not an escape artist. He's just has like instant teleportation to another plane, basically. The real story of his ignominious retreat from Bourlor was thankfully forgotten. The bad news, when it came, was delivered him with some relish by Horavatha. He had delighted in her jealousy at his growing reputation, so with a cruel smile she told him, "Your shrines are being assaulted." "Who dares?" he roared. "Everyone who passes them in the wilderness feels the need to throw a stone. You can hardly blame them. After all, they represent he who cannot be touched. And how could anyone be expected to resist such a target?" Vernachus peered through the veil into the world of Mundus and saw that it was true. One of his shrines in Colovian West Country was surrounded by a large platoon of mercenary shoulders who delighted in pelting with rocks. His worshippers huddled inside, praying for a miracle. Right, so Colovian West. That's like High Rock, maybe. In an instant, he appeared before the mercenaries, and his rage was terrifying to behold. They fled into the woods before he even had a chance to murder one of them. His worshippers threw open the wooden door of the shrine and dropped to their knees in joy and fear. His anger melted. Then a stone struck him, then another. He turned to face his assailants, but the air was suddenly filled with rocks. Vernachus could not see them, but he heard mercenaries in the woods laugh. "It's not even trying to move out of the way." "It's impossible not to hit him," guffawed another. "Whoa, whoa, whoa." With a roar of humiliation, the Daedra bounded into the shrine, chased by the onslaught. One of the stones knocked the door closed behind him, striking him in the back. His face broke, anger and embarrassment disappearing, replaced by pain. He turned shaking to his worshippers who huddled in the shadows of the shrine, their faith shattered. "Where did you get the wood to build this shrine?" Vernachus groaned. "Mostly from a copse of trees near the village of Evansekon." His high priest shrugged. Vernachus nodded. He dropped forward, revealing a deep wound in his back. A rusted arrowhead buried in a whirl in the wood of the door had jolted loose in the assault and impaled him. The Daedra vanished in a whirlwind of dust. So the arrow did get him. Wait, how though? Oh, I see. So Kynareth's blessing worked eventually. Nice. The shrines were abandoned shortly after, though Vernachus did have a brief resurgence as the patron spirit of limitations and impotence. Yikes. Before fading from memory altogether. The legend of Bourlor himself never became very well known either, but there are still some who tell the tale, like myself. And we have the advantage of knowing what the great archer himself didn't know on his deathbed. His final arrow found its target after all. Yeah. Oh man, that was a good story. Yeah, the books are so good. Okay. Back to Morrowind. So I was, yeah, in Meligmar. I suppose I shall explore it. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. It's a little quiet, but that's okay. I heard of that place, Arab Ben Nimsum Camp. I want to meet the Ashlanders. They sound really interesting. Okay, that's where we are. Yeah. So it's a combination of a frontier garrison and pilgrimage hostel. Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. Yes, the Void Armiger's. I want to go to these places, the two pilgrimage sites, Mount Asarnibi and Mount Kand. Fanjira. I think that, yeah, that's who I. His name was like Poud or something. I don't know. I originally was not going to go over here. I was going to go do the main quest over here, but there was this guy who wanted me to escort him over here. I thought it was going to be really dangerous, but it was actually pretty chill. He wanted to do business or make a pilgrimage. I'm not entirely sure. But I am curious. Must be here. So it was. I wonder if any of these pilgrimages I need to make are near here. They must be. Um, What are the shrines called again? Mount Kand. See, like over there. I'm not really sure, but I feel like I didn't see those in the pilgrimage book. Hello, House Redrin. I like House Redrin. They seem like pretty honorable folks. Hawker the Candle. You have a silly face. Can I sell you anything? Oh, he's got a lot of money, actually. It's worth $4,000. I honestly do want to sell it sometime. Because I'm not really a short blade user. Hello, Refiso Andalas. Ah, nice, he sells books. Just gonna take all your money. Hey, nice. That's how we do it. We barter. Have that one too. Honestly, whatever. I feel like I'm not gonna find a bookseller, so take all your money. Speechcraft. I do want to level up Speechcraft. But actually, didn't I want to, this time, I don't want to do personality. I want to get endurance and intelligence. Specifically endurance would be great. So alchemy, I could do a lot of alchemy. I should try that. Yeah, endurance is kind of tricky because it's all armor. Yo, amazing. Okay. I'm gonna stop stream because I'm so tired. I'm falling asleep. But oh man, I'm so excited to read this. Okay, I'll read this first because this is some of my favorite parts of this game. The 36 lessons of the Vec. They're nuts. These were the days of Resdania, when the Chimer and Dwemer lived under the wise and benevolent rule of the Alm Civi and their champion, the Hortator, the Nerevar. And the gods of Veloth would retreat unto their own to mold the cosmos and other matter. The Hortator would at times become confused. Vivek would always be there to advise him. This is the second of the 3 lessons of ruling kings. The secret syllable of royalty is this. You must learn this elsewhere. The temporal myth is man. Time isn't real, sure, yeah. The magical cross is an integration. The worth of mortals at the expense of their spirits. What? It's an integration of the worth of mortals at the expense of their spirits. Surrounded with the triangle and you begin to see the Triton House. Oh gosh. So at the expense of their spirits, I wonder, I know there's a lot of like ancestor spirit use and resurrection focus on the dead. So the worth of mortals, when they are alive, at the expense of their spirits when they die. So it's a cross. One piece of the cross is the life